Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Night Fireside, hosted by Dr. Nasser and Zebra Bashiralahi. Firesides are informal gatherings for introductory conversations about the Baha'i faith. They're excellent opportunities for people to ask questions and learn about how the faith's teachings relate to contemporary life. So if you haven't been here before, welcome. We gather here every Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and it is always in the same Zoom room. So feel free to bookmark it, share it with your friends, tweet it out, etc. We always start with a prayer, followed by a selected reading from the Baha'i writings, and then we will introduce the speaker. The speaker is either a Baha'i or a friend of the faith, and usually speaks between 45 to 90 minutes, followed by Q&A. So please save your questions for the end instead of typing them into the chat as we go so that we can remain focused on the presentation. If you would like to keep your questions anonymous, please send them to me directly and I'll read them during the Q&A portion. We appreciate you staying muted during the time so that we can remain focused on the presentation. These are being recorded and will be made available on the YouTube channel. If you search Bashiralahi Firesides on YouTube, you'll see the channel. And with that being said, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Bashiralahi so he can introduce our schedule for the evening. So Dr. Nasser, it is all yours.
Okay, Gary, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Nasser. How to unmute myself.
Nasser, you're muted.
O thou kind Lord, O thou who art generous and merciful, we are the servants of thy threshold and are gathered beneath the sheltering shadow of thy divine unity. The sun of thy mercy is shining upon all, and the clouds of thy bounty shower upon all. Thy gifts encompass all. Thy loving providence sustains all. Thy protection overshadows all, and the glances of thy favor are cast upon all. O Lord, grant thine infinite bestowals, and let the light of thy guidance shine. Illumine the eyes, gladden the hearts with abiding joy. Confer a new spirit upon all people, and bestow them eternal life. Unlock the gates of true understanding, and let the light of faith shine resplendent. Gather all people beneath the shadow of thy bounty, and cause them to unite in harmony, so that they may become as the rays of one sun, as the waves of one ocean, and as the fruit of one tree. May they drink from the same fountain. May they be refreshed by the same breeze. May they receive illumination from the same source of light. Thou art the giver, the merciful, the omnipotent.
Corey, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It is incumbent upon every man in this day to hold fast unto whatsoever will promote the interests and exalt the stations of all nations and just governments. Through each and every one of the verses which the pen of the Most High hath revealed, the doors of love and unity have been unlocked and flung open to the face of men. We have erewhile decreed, and our word is the truth, consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. Whatsoever hath led men to shun one another, and hath caused dissension and divisions amongst them, hath through the revelation of these words been nullified and abolished. From the heaven of God's will, and for the purpose of ennobling the world of being and of elevating the minds and souls of men, hath been sent down that which is the most effective instrument for the education of the whole human race. The highest essence and most perfect expression of whatsoever the peoples of old hath either said or written hath through this most potent revelation been sent down from the heaven of the will of the all-possessing, the ever-abiding God. Of old it hath been revealed, love of one's country is an element of the faith of God. The tongue of grandeur hath, however, in this day, the day of his manifestation proclaimed, it is not his to boast who loveth his country, but it is his who loveth the world. Through the power released by these exalted words, he hath lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction to the birds of men's hearts, and hath obliterated every trace of restriction and limitation from God's holy book. This wronged one hath forbidden the people of God to engage in contention or conflict, and hath exhorted them to righteous deeds and praiseworthy character. In this day, the hosts that can ensure the victory of the cause are those of goodly conduct and saintly character. Blessed are they who firmly adhere unto them, and woe betide such as turn away therefrom.
Thank you, Corey. Sue, are you ready? You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me
Yes,
now?
yes.
All right, okay. All right, well, when Nasser asked me to introduce David, I said, yes, I will so happily do that to share about our long time relationship. So David and Nasser and I were part of the same little Baha'i community in College Park, Maryland. Mostly students. I think it was all students at the time, except for Nasser, who was a teacher, and Butch and I had just returned from a teaching trip in Africa, as kind of like Africa on $5 a day for us. But we formed the first assembly. The three of us and my husband, Butch, were on the first assembly of College Park in 1973. And then David left, and I went to lived in Jopletown. I wasn't familiar about that you served in another assembly. I wasn't aware of that, David, but when we heard that David was going to Africa, pioneering to Africa, he was really the first of our little group of doing something like that. And we were excited. I was, because we had just returned and we thought it would be a wonderful experience and such a service, such a great service. And I remember, I don't know if you do this, Nasser, recall, we was very close knit and we loved each other like family, I feel. And I remember one of the first letters back, I think from David, and my comment being, I think David has found himself in Africa. And I remember Sina saying, oh, and I was afraid he would lose himself in Africa. Anyway, I think David had the reputation of being kind of, little philosophical and his head in the clouds, kind of, and not really, all that practical. Anyway, I think I was right in that. I think he absolutely did and has done some tremendous service. But over the years, we kept in touch. Every year that David would come back, we would say, David, it's an event. We have a picnic in our yard or something, and invite all the old friends. And I know every year Nasser would have him come to his firesides over all these decades. And then our children. So then David brought Manal, introduced Manal to us. And then Ramin, and introduced us to Ramin. And our youngest daughter, Amelia, is born right around the same time, a little bit older. But so our kids grew and we continued staying in touch. And our daughter, Amelia, decided to do a year of service in Cameroon for the Baha'is. And she did do that. So she spent some time living with David and Manal and Ramin. And then after our kids had graduated, grown, Amelia and I went back to Cameroon for the 50th anniversary of the Baha'i faith in Cameroon in 2003. And we traveled and attended a wonderful celebration there. Then in recent years, we've been aware of, the difficulties in Cameroon of them staying there. And it was only just 2 years ago that I learned about how serious it was. So I was really hoping and praying that they would be well and that they could come back. And yes, I got a message, I think in September, saying, we are back. We are back. We were staying in Baltimore and visiting Brother Warren, I know. And then ultimately moving in with Ramin in Gainesville. I'm almost done. I know I only have 2 minutes, right? Gainesville, but I need to tell this last part. So now they're in South Carolina, but he'll tell you about some of the work that he's done, and he was full-time working, serving for the faith for these last years since he's been retired, and busy all the time with it. And they came back to the US and they didn't have all the connections. And I was just in the process of beginning to work on a junior youth group for my granddaughter. And I have actually 3 grandchildren that are now doing junior youth groups with David and Manal. 2 of them are with Manal and 1 is with David. And David and Manal are accompanying some new animators, which is something that they had done really for decades in Cameroon. So to me, it was like an answer to prayers for my grandkids to be part of a junior youth group with this wonderful family. And I think it's given them, something to do before everybody else finds out about them, and they have many, many, many other things to do. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. So thank you for letting me talk about him, Nasser.
David, you're on.
Okay. So here we go. Anyway, as Sue explained, my wife and I spent most of our adult lives in Cameroon, a country located on the west coast of Africa, just southwest of Nigeria, along the coast of Guinea. If you know how Africa goes down and around like this, right there at that point where this goes like this, that's the Gulf of Guinea, and that is where the country of Cameroon. We live mostly in the Northwest Province, a very beautiful place full of rolling hills, lush vegetation, and a lovely climate and wonderful people. Throughout the year, we didn't need either an air conditioner or a heater. It was just a nice place to live. Both of us went with similar motives. We went to do something, we wanted to do something special and meaningful with our lives. It was at the encouragement of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States that I went to Cameroon. And Manal went there at the encouragement of the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran. East met West. We weren't missionaries in the traditional sense, as missionaries generally are clergy people who have a special authoritative position in the religious community. The Baha'i faith has no clergy, but it does have institutions elected by the Baha'is themselves. We came to assist, not to lead the Baha'i communities in Cameroon. Our efforts were guided by the elected Baha'i institutions that were already there. Since we were not paid, we had to get employment, and we both taught for the National Ministry of Education for Cameroon at the secondary and high school levels. And our experience with the students of Cameroon is another story, which I will not go into it today. I taught many people, including the older sister of Mona, who is here today in our group. Like every place in the world, Cameroon is a country full of immense contradictions. If you want to look for the negative, there were always things to complain about: frequent electrical outages, unreliable water supply, and very poor internet connections. On the other hand, there is much to appreciate and love. Cameroon is a country of very kind people. Because most people don't have personal cars, the streets are always full of pedestrians, neighbors walking to and from work, to and from the market, or to and from each other's homes, greeting each other as they pass by, stopping to say a few friendly words. In our neighborhood, people regularly visited each other, and we could go to any home, knock on any door at any time, and receive a warm welcome. In such an open and welcoming culture, an illness or death in a family is soon known by all, and people come by to express sympathy. This is the style of life very typical of Cameroon. Sharing food is another key component of life there. People cook more than they can eat so that they can be sure to have something for someone who might stop by. And good friends will quite often send food to their neighbors. I can't count how many meals Manal and I enjoyed from our kind neighbors and friends. Cameroonians and Africans generally are a very religious people. Their faith in God is an important part of their lives, and it surely reinforces their love for their neighbors and friends. Although we human beings are so capable of love on an individual level, it appears difficult for humanity to demonstrate collective love and concern on larger scales. This is why so many nations have intense national divisions, including our own, the United States. People's faith and love for humanity often fails in the face of ingrained prejudice based on ethnicity or nationality. African nations are no exception, and the fault lines are deep. The divisions that exist in African nations are somewhat unique in that the history of nation building in Africa is unique and finds its origins in the colonial era. An understanding of the divisions and conflicts in Africa will help us realize that the teachings of Baha'u'llah on the unity of the human race are needed as much there as anywhere else. Most Western countries gradually built up their national identities over centuries, often having civil wars and revolutions along the way. Most Western nations evolved over time, basing their national identity on a common language, a common culture, a common history. This isn't the case with African nations. They were artificial creations carved out of the geography through the great European land grab of the colonial era. In the process, they split up tribal kingdoms into two separated traditional friends and allies, and threw together traditional enemies. These colonies became independent states with little preparation from their colonial masters, and with no experience in national self-rule. And the people had no common national identity. This takes generations to establish. Democratic institutions and traditions are likewise not built in a day. It should be of little wonder then that many of these new countries fell victim to internal conflict, civil wars, military dictatorships. Some countries have escaped this, others are still suffering through these strifes, and others have successfully come out of them with the hope of building a new and more peaceful society. In Africa, a person's first identity and allegiance is usually connected with his tribe, And people are generally expected to give their first loyalty and even to pursue the interests of their tribe. These tribes have traditional rulers and they control territory, much as nations do. Violent conflicts sometimes arise over territorial boundaries. These conflicts have often led to lasting and bitter divisions. Tribal conflicts sometimes enter national politics as competing groups struggle to control the national government. I'm not necessarily always speaking of Cameroon, but various countries have had these problems to one degree or another. Tribalism, however, isn't equivalent to racism, which plagues the United States. It is more akin to nationalism and the excesses of a misguided loyalty to one's own nation, tribe, or clan. People of different tribes get along quite well, often intermarry, often live in the same urban communities. It is only when tribal interests are at stake that tempers flare. Unethical political leaders may often exploit tribal conflicts for their own personal political gain. But I note that there are politicians in every nation, including our own, that will do this, exploit differences among people. The progress of the African people, like the progress of societies everywhere, depends upon how well people are able to subordinate their lesser loyalties to a higher loyalty to all mankind. In Cameroon, in the very region where we lived, a number of territorial conflicts broke out between tribal groups, between the Bali and Bawak people some years ago. Homes were burned, people were displaced, and lives were lost. It was quite disheartening, and our Baha'i community tried to do some good by offering food and clothing to displaced people of this conflict. I want to make it clear that the teachings of Baha'u'llah don't preclude an attachment to our nation, clan, or tribe. In the words of the Universal House of Justice, and I paraphrase, we cannot, or rather we can be attached to our tribes and clans, just as we are to our families and on a larger scale to our nation. But we must not allow this attachment to conflict with our wider loyalty to humanity. Shoghi Effendi emphasized this point when he wrote, "People must not hesitate to subordinate every particular interest, be it personal, regional, or national, to the overriding interests of the generality of mankind, knowing full well that in a world of interdependent peoples and nations, the advantage of the part is best to be reached by the advantage of the whole, and that no lasting result can be achieved by any of the component parts if the general interests of the entity itself are neglected." And again, Shoghi Effendi wrote, "Let there be no misgivings as to the animating purpose of the Baha'i faith. It does not ignore, nor does it attempt to suppress the diversity of ethnic origins, of climate, of history, of language and tradition, of thought and habit that differentiate the peoples and nations of the world. It calls for a wider loyalty, for a larger aspiration than that has animated the human race. It insists upon the subordination of every national impulse, interest to the imperative needs of a unified world. Its watchword is unity and diversity." Unity and diversity is a very beautiful expression. It implies that a peaceful world doesn't require everyone to be the same. It doesn't require uniformity. Differences of race, culture, language beautify the world in the same way that the various flowers of various colors beautify a garden. Unity and diversity requires us to realize that we cannot consider ourselves superior to others because of our race, religion, culture, or nationality. Nor can we require others to conform to our ways before we can feel human love towards them. In the hidden words of Baha'u'llah, the voice of God speaks out to us, "O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other?" When Manal and I shared the Baha'i teachings in Africa, it was to share those principles that are the only true foundation of a united and peaceful world civilization. That the people of the world are one people, and that all forms of prejudice and discrimination must consequently be eliminated. The African continent is also a place with a multiplicity of religions, and consequently it has suffered from religious strife, but so have many other places in the world. It would be too depressing to recount the bloodshed that has been shed in the name of religion throughout history. Thankfully, there was no such religious strife in the region of Cameroon where we lived, although churches often preached against each other. They even preached against the Baha'i faith. I didn't mind too much as they preached against each other. Why shouldn't they also make the Baha'i faith a target as well? It was just part of life, I suppose. Elsewhere, however, armed conflicts between Christians and Muslims have occurred, such as in Nigeria, Cameroon's western neighbor. And the activities of Boko Haram in Nigeria have spilled over into northern Cameroon. Fortunately, these events were far to the north from where we lived, and they didn't affect us personally. To eliminate religious strife would require a paradigm shift in human thinking. The revelation of Baha'u'llah teaches that there is revealed truth in every religion, that the spiritual teachings of all religions are fundamentally the same, and that all religions have contributed to the advancement of civilization. Differences between religions, like the differences between the divisions within a religion, are based on man-made interpretations, human misunderstandings, and man-made rituals and practice, not to mention age-old ignorance and prejudice. Behind these man-made distinctions lies a common spiritual and divine foundation which all religions share. If we can accept this truth and advocate this truth, we are promoting a principle that will lessen the religious tensions that have plagued humanity. And we will come to realize that God's revelation has covered the earth and has reached all people. I must admit that in my discussions with people in Africa and in the United States, this principle goes against the grain of what most people have been taught. But if certain truths are easy to understand, there would be no need for God's revelation to emphasize them in this age. Sometimes people ask me, Dave, when you were in Africa, was your motivation to convert people to the Baha'i faith? Our purpose in teaching the principles revealed by Baha'u'llah is far more profound than simply getting people to change their religion. What the faith of Baha'u'llah calls for us is a fundamental change in the attitudes of all people regarding their fellow man. Its intent is to change people's perspective on life in the world, to bestow upon people a world consciousness, to open people's hearts so that they are lovers of all humanity. The revelation of Baha'u'llah refers to such a people as a new race of man. Let me see if I can find my paper. I want to read to you what Abdul Baha wrote about the vision of the Baha'i faith, of Baha'u'llah's revelation. And he said, "My hope is that through the zeal and ardor of the pure of heart, the darkness of hatred and difference will be entirely abolished, and the light of love and unity shall shine. This world shall become a new world. Things material shall become the mirror of the divine. Human hearts shall meet and embrace each other. The whole world become as man's native country, and the different races be counted as one race." Although you don't have to be a Baha'i to share this vision, it is nevertheless a vision that is shared by Baha'is everywhere. It is the common denominator which binds the worldwide Baha'i community together. And you see it in the attitudes and perspective towards life, whether the person is a businessman from New York or a farmer from a village in Cameroon. The New Yorker may say it in a debonair manner, and the village farmer may say it in his own rustic way, but their vision of life acquired by the teachings of Baha'u'llah are the same. You see it in the way Cameroonian Baha'is come together, regardless of tribe or religious background. They know they are one people. This is the hope of Africa, and this is the hope of humanity. It is a consciousness that is growing from the grassroots among ordinary people of all walks of life, although it goes largely unnoticed. Now, if I told you that the light of Baha'u'llah is illuminating the world, I can understand a certain incredulity. The world appears to be enveloped in darkness, but darkness itself can sometimes be an illusion. Space seems dark. Space seems empty of light except for the sprinkling of stars. But in reality, space is full of light. But this light needs something to illuminate. Once an object in space is illuminated, the light traversing space becomes all too apparent. The light of Baha'u'llah is in the world, and it is searching for receptive souls to illuminate. For those of you who have no hope for humanity, I have two observations to share. One for people of faith and the other for those who aren't. For those of you who are people of faith, I would like to say this, that the unity of the human race is and always has been God's purpose for humanity. It is reflected in the book of Isaiah, which states, "They will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." It is also reflected in the gospel, in the Lord's Prayer, which states, "God's kingdom come, God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven." How many times have I said that in my childhood without realizing its significance? It is likewise reflected in the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And Baha'u'llah said, "These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come." If you aren't a person of faith, I will appeal to your sense of history. The entire history of the human race is a history of progress, of civilization, from lower to higher levels of unity. At one time, mankind was united only at the level of the family, and families hunted and gathered for their food. But gradually, families united into clans and tribes, tribes united into city-states and nations. And now we stand at the very threshold of world unity. It is the next great step in the progress of civilization. Universal House of Justice boldly stated that the unity of mankind is inevitable, but it will come either through horrific suffering or through an act of consultative will on the part of the nations and the people of the world. From all appearances, humanity has chosen the path of horrific suffering, The current of history, like the current of a river, is taking humanity in a certain direction. If we fight the current, as many do, many will die, perhaps like the drowning of Pharaoh's army in the sea. Or humanity can swim with the current and survive. But either way, the current of history has its own direction, and God has his own purpose. There is one thing that makes Cameroon unique among African nations. It is bilingual. It has 2 official colonial languages. You need to know that Cameroon was at first a German colony at the end of the First World War. It was subsequently divided between the English and the French, with the French getting the lion's share. When Cameroon was given its independence in 1960, the 2 portions were put back together. Sadly, the smaller English-speaking portion always felt marginalized by the larger French-speaking region. Tensions grew, and over the past decade, armed insurrection spread throughout the English-speaking region, especially in and around Bamenda, the town in which Manal and I called home for 40 years. Manal and I used to travel confidently everywhere. Then it became dangerous to venture out of town, and even became risky to venture into certain parts of the town. Kidnappings were common, and anyone who stood out could be a victim. Whenever either of us had to go to town, the other would worry until the other returned. Reluctantly, we decided to leave, which we did last September. People have asked me if I accomplished anything of importance there. The thing that I am most proud of are the 2 radio programs we produced. Manal and I and others who made up our team. Our program, one of our programs, concerned child education and family life. It was amazingly popular. We all became radio personalities. Amazing. Before we initiated this project, child education was not a topic that people generally discussed. If it was discussed at all, people would just quote the old adage, spare the rod and spoil the child. Gradually, we discovered that child education had become a very popular subject, and people were talking about it intelligently. The radio station gave us the Golden Team Award in 2018. There was no gold involved, but we appreciate it all the same. In our other program, we discussed Baha'i principles in general. What? My wife is there trying to give me some ideas for. Well, anyway, we discussed our principles in general, and as social unrest grew, we more and more emphasized the need for peace and reconciliation. Perhaps we could not stem the tide of events. We certainly didn't. Perhaps people need to learn the horrors of war firsthand. Maybe we failed. Maybe God's intention was something else. Don't know. Many said that the Baha'i community would disappear after our departure, but they didn't know the Baha'i faith. We are in touch with the Baha'i community over WhatsApp and Facebook, and I am very proud to say that the community is stronger than ever. The challenges of these times have only strengthened their resolve. The Baha'i community has grown by leaps and bounds over the years that I was there. No credit to myself. The faith has its own spirit that moves it. Anyway, I didn't go to Africa with a misguided notion of changing people's culture or way of life. The revelation of Baha'u'llah demanded that I respect it, see the good in it, love and appreciate it. I went to Africa to assist those who were already there, working for the betterment of the world and the unity of its people. The Baha'is of Cameroon continue that work. What also binds Baha'is together worldwide is the conviction that we have found in Baha'u'llah the fulfillment of the coming of God's promised Lord. I want to point out before I end that one of the people here, Mona Farugi, her parents are still there. Fortunately, where they live, it's not quite as hot as Baminda, but that doesn't mean they're safe either. And I daily give a little prayer for them. Anyway, I would like to share with you in closing these words written by Baha'u'llah. The revelation which from time immemorial hath been acclaimed as the purpose and promise of all the prophets of God hath now been revealed unto men. The advent of such a revelation hath been heralded in all the sacred scriptures. It is incumbent upon all the peoples of the world to reconcile their differences and with perfect unity and peace abide beneath the shadow of the tree of God's care and loving kindness. I think it was Donald Duck who once said, "That's all, folks."
David, as usual, I can't thank you enough, and I can't say enough about you and Menal, really. As my wife always say, this gentleman and his wife really truly an embodiment of true human being. These are the things that it will stay in our heart, and I'm hoping not just in this world, but the worlds to come, really. Our love for you and your family and all the effort that you have made in your life is forever, really. And we thank you very much.